Hello, and welcome to an afternoon with Joseph Cashore. Thank you, and enjoy the program.
So I would like to start out by asking you, what is a marionette and how is it different than other kinds of puppets?
A marionette is a puppet controlled by strings. There are many kinds of puppets. There are hand puppets, which you're probably familiar with. Put them on your hand like a glove. There are rod puppets that are worked by rods from underneath. A lot of the Sesame Street puppets, some of those are rod puppets, some of them are hand puppets. There are shadow puppets, which are big in Indonesia. They're made by casting a shadow on a screen. And the marionette is a puppet that is controlled by strings from above. That's the short.
Awesome. So how does a marionette work with the strings? How's it put together? Can you show us some?
Yes, I will.
Ah, this beautiful spiritual man.
This puppet's name is Ramul. He's the oldest marionette that I have in the show that I do. I made him probably in around 1971 or 2. He also has one of the simpler control mechanisms, so I'll explain a little bit about that. The weight of the puppet's body is carried by these 2 shoulder strings. There's a string tied here and a string tied here. They come up here and they're tied at the bottom of this control. They bear the weight of the body. These are the first strings I attach. The weight of his head is carried separately by 1 string on either side of his head, just above his ear here. They come up here and they're tied on the ends of this horizontal bar. I don't know if you can see, but there's one tied here and there's one tied here. So if I want the character to turn his head, if I want him to look in that direction, all I have to do is tilt this bar this way. That pulls this string. At the same time, it releases this one, allowing him to turn his head. If I want him to look in the other direction, I'll just tilt that bar the other way. He turns his head. This is the first thing I try to get control of on the puppet, because I want him to be able to focus his attention. That makes him seem much more alive. He has a string on the end of his nose. If I want him to look up, I'm just going to pull that string and he looks up. If I want him to look down, I'm going to hold those shoulder strings I was telling you about with my little finger and lower the head bar in relation to it. And he'll look down. Now that's how the head works. To get the puppet to move his arms, I've tied the string right near the end of his hands here. They come up here and they're tied on the ends of this piece of wire. This is just a piece of coat hanger wire like you hang your clothes on at home. This pivots off the main control bar here. I'm moving his right arm with my middle finger right here. Just lift that bar. And I'm moving his left arm with my thumb. I can also reach in with my left hand and spread his arms out for more expansive gestures. And he also has these elbow strings, which gives some variety to his arm motions, makes him seem a little more lively. Those elbow strings are tied right at the elbow joint, and they come up here, and they're tied right next to the head bar there. I'm moving them with my ring finger and my little finger. I've tried to arrange the control so that I can reach as many strings as possible. I put the strings close together, but not so close that I can't get my fingers in between them and select whatever string I'm looking for. To get the puppet to walk, I've tied the string just above his knee. When you take a step, you naturally bend your knee. You don't want to put those walking strings on his feet or he wouldn't have a natural looking step. So to get him to walk, I'll just raise one knee at a time, allow the leg to swing forward, and I'm moving his body along with my right hand. I'm trying very hard to keep his weight centered over his step so it feels like he's carrying his own weight. I want to feel the transfer of weight from one step to the next so it feels natural. I hope that answers the question.
Oh, that's awesome. So first of all, how do you know how a puppet should move? Do you study yourself, or you study?
Yeah, it's mostly observation. And there's a lot of experimentation with, when I build a new puppet, I take little pieces of lead weights and I'll tape them in different parts of the body, trying to adjust the weight within the body so that it moves naturally. So the distribution of weight throughout the body really is one of the main factors in having good movement in a marionette. So I spend a lot of time with that.
And how would you show emotions? Like he's sad, he's angry, he's...
Emotion, just its body language. You know, if he's sad, he could look sad, or if he's happy, he could...
That's awesome.
What's that? Say it again.
Wilmo,
Yes.
would you show us a close-up of the controller again so that we can
Sure.
see where he was talking about tucking his fingers in between strings?
Oh, yes. Right here. These are the elbow strings. I can reach them here or here. These are the shoulder strings. I can reach them with my little finger. So it's like that. And this is a nose string. I can reach that with my little finger and my ring finger there so that he can look up when I do that. Also, I wanted to point out, sometimes I want to free my left hand of the leg bar. So what I've done is I touched a little magnet on there, and I have a little magnet on my pocket, so I can hang that up, and that leaves my arm free to use both hands to work the puppet. So I'm not hanging onto the leg bar all the time, although sometimes I do. This puppet can do a little karate. And he's equipped with a special string that draws his hands together.
Wow.
I have a question from the audience. Do you still have your clothespin and tin can puppet?
You know, I wish I did. I don't. I lost track of that somewhere in the early 60s, I guess.
Have you ever recreated it with students or anything like that?
I haven't. I probably should, just to make it again, but it wasn't really a very good puppet, but sometimes
Compared to what you have now.
Well, even at the time. But the thing that I learned making that first puppet was if it moved just right, just for an instant, it would look like it was alive to me. And I remembered that when I got a little older and thought, I'm going to try to make a more realistic puppet that can sustain that sensation of being alive. And that's what I've been working on ever since. I'm going to put this down.
That's awesome.
Free my arm.
Can you...
Another,
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, another question is, how do you design it so the strings do not get tangled?
Well, that's largely a matter of working with the marionette. If you pick it up every day, you know, when I'm rehearsing a new piece, I pick it up and playing with it, and it does get tangled. And I stop and I look at it and I try to understand what happened. Why did it get tangled? And if you do that every day for a couple of hours, after a while, you're just not getting tangled anymore. You've learned where all the danger spots are and how to handle it in such a way that you don't get tangled. I can't say that I never get tangled anymore, but it's very, very rare.
Awesome.
I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, that's perfect. So in that vein, you said something the other day about, it was almost like a prioritizing what movements you're going to do find your quote. You said every gesture needs to contribute to the main theme.
Right. It's like a short story in that you don't want a lot of extraneous details. I try to make it so that every gesture reinforces the main theme of the piece, whatever it is we're trying to communicate. Even if the puppet can do something very interesting, if it doesn't contribute to advancing the theme, I usually leave it out. So the process of rehearsing a new piece is very often eliminating things that are non-essential. It's much more powerful if everything reinforces the main idea of the piece.
That's awesome.
So,
So can you show us your horse puppet?
yeah, sure. Sure.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing.
So this is the horse marionette. There are several parts to it here. what I'm holding in my left hand right now is the head and neck control. I can tilt this in different ways. He turns his head. On the head control, I have access to his ears. I can pull one ear back or both ears like that.
Can I come in and you can show that again?
Yeah, I'll show you. I have a range of control. So here where my thumbs are, I can take this one ear string and pull it. Now that ear is mounted on a spring, pardon me. There's a little swivel at the top of the spring so that when he turns his ear back, it swivels out the way a horse's does. Now this control I'm holding in my left hand fits on this hook right here. Well, before I show you about that, let me just show his walk. When I'm going to walk the puppet, I take these leg strings that I'm holding in my left hand now. I'm going to rock those back and forth and move the puppet's body along. I try to get a rhythm so it feels like he's carrying his own weight. But the way this is arranged is such a way that when he raises his right front leg, his left rear leg also raises. And when I raise his left front leg, his rear right leg raises. So I just rock this back and forth, try to get the sensation that he's carrying his own weight. However, when he runs, when he gallops, I have a different arrangement of the strings. What I do is I extend this neck, and then I separate these two strings. I separate his front legs from his rear legs. So now I can get him running like that.
That's amazing. I have a question.
Yes.
We've gotten a few comments that the sound is amazing. Is that coincidence, or did you design it so that the sound is that fantastic?
That was a lucky accident.
Can you move back, please? Because I can't go back any further.
That was just a lucky accident that he made the sound of a horse when he was running. I did want to point out one of the little issues with this when I was building it was when I extended his neck, this threw the whole thing out of balance. It was very hard for me to get control of him. So what I did was I made this little system of tubes and pulleys. This is a solid lead weight. It weighs the same as this head control. So when I put the head control on that hook, I have this arranged so that when I extend the neck, this lead weight moves the same distance in the opposite direction, allowing me to maintain the same center of balance. So it still feels balanced in my hand, and now I can run the horse. Also on the horse, I have these tail strings. I can sway his tail back and forth, or I can flick it with this other string. I might as well point out this too. Another problem with the stringing of the horse initially was I had too much slack down by his feet. So I added these pieces of tubing here. I'm going to try to explain this. I hope it's clear. This tubing, when he runs or walks, I can pull these leg strings. They have to be of a certain length to be functional, and this is the length. But before I put these tubes on here, the slack that this is taking up would end up down at his heels and he'd get his feet caught in his own strings. So this, I call this a slack taper upper, prevents that from happening. I hope that's clear.
Very clear.
Okay.
And so if you go back to how you built this, did you start from photographs or drawings, or how?
Oh, I made many drawings of the marionettes. I went and looked at horses in the field. I made a lot of drawings. Actually, maybe we could show the drawing right now.
Can you show them the spring loading of the joint?
Oh,
Because
yeah,
that helps
okay.
make the noise
My
sound.
wife wants me to show you this before we look at the drawings. All the joints on the horse are spring loaded. There's an internal spring here that goes right around the joint, so that when he lifts his ankle turns back, but when I release it, it snaps right back down and he appears to catch his own weight. before I put those spring-loaded ankles in, he would sometimes be walking on his the front of his foot. It didn't look right, so I did that. Okay, what else should
Pictures?
I have some specialty strings here for rearing up, and also he has some specialty strings for when he. Whoops, I won't do that. When he sits on the ground, he can tuck his legs under.
Some of the audience are wondering if you studied engineering with the intricacy of all those controls.
Well, I just studied it out of necessity. You know, it's problem solving, making the marionettes, and I have no background in engineering, but you just find yourself trying to solve technical problems. So can we show the drawing of the horse? Usually before I make a marionette, I'll make a drawing. This is the drawing of the horse, the scale drawing. I made a lot of smaller drawings. Maybe you could show those.
Which one first?
Let's look at the scale drawing. This is the actual size drawing of the horse from which I generated the parts. I make a drawing, I trace out the parts, and then well, I'll show you that later, how you build it from that. But I made a lot of these little drawings of horses when I was working on that. It all came in handy. Let me put this horse back.
And then after you make a drawing, then how do you figure out what the scale is that like the size compared to what you're drawing?
Well, I'm trying to make it as large as I can and still have good control of the puppet. I have experimented with this a lot. And for most marionettes, 27 inches is about the maximum scale that I feel I can still get good movement out of the puppet. If I make it much larger than that, it gets too pendulous, it gets too heavy, and so it's difficult to manipulate. So I work at this scale because it's what I can handle.
Got it. Amazing.
Let me put this back down.
So if someone wanted to make a puppet at home, what would they start with?
Well, if you've never made a marionette before, I'm going to suggest, can I show you the? This is probably the simplest kind of puppet you could make. I was asked by a middle school teacher many years ago to come up with a project that a middle school, I think they were 7th grade, could do on their own. So I came up with this wooden marionette, which is very simple. It's just made out of wood and duct tape, but it still has all the moving parts. He has pretty good gestures. He can do a lot of things.
Wilma, can you close up on the puppet?
Okay. Sure. A second. Detach it here.
Sorry.
No problem.
I just want to see some of his mannerisms.
I just want to do some
That's great.
he's dying in the desert or something, looking over the,
That's awesome.
anyway, this wasn't perfectly satisfactory to the art school, to the art teacher. So because they would have had to cut wood and they didn't want to bring out saws and things. So I came up with an alternative, which is this puppet here, which is entirely made out of cardboard, just corrugated cardboard, aluminum foil for the head, and duct tape for all the joints. And it's very simple. And instead of using, I usually use a fishing line for the puppets, but for this, it's so lightweight you can get away with just using carpet thread, which is available at any fabric store, and it's much cheaper than buying the fishing line. But this puppet also can do a lot. It's very simple, but it's all there. If somebody had never made a marionette, I'm going to suggest making one of these very simple marionettes, unless you have a very strong idea. But it's very easy to go wrong with making marionettes, but the simpler you can make it, the better your chances of success. So I usually like to tell people, you can refer to your own body to understand how the movement should be. That is, when you take a step, you can't bend your knee further than 190 degrees, further than straight. So you make the joint of the leg so that it stops right there. If you'd like, actually, I'll show you this right now. I have, oh, I was going to put that backdrop on.
Yeah, why don't you?
All right, let me just get something here. Put this in here. This will make this easier to see. I wanted to put that up as a backdrop so that you could see, the stringing a little better. If somebody had never made a puppet before, as I said, I'm suggesting you start like this because you can learn a lot about it. To get the head movement like that, I usually add a little bit of weight in the front of the head here. So I have most of the mass is in the front here, and I think I might have put a dime or a penny inside the aluminum foil right there. This is an example of the joining of this marionette. It's just duct tape on cardboard. Now, I could show you this actually. I can make one right here. Here's a section. This could be a part of the leg. This could be another part of the leg. Here's some duct tape. I can wrap that. Right there. Well, I hope you're interested in this. I hope this is worthwhile. If not, we can do something else.
No, we love it. And we're putting, you sent us instructions to make this little guy, and we're putting that in the chat. So it's great that you're showing us. We have a vision of what.
Now I've made two of these just by wrapping that cardboard together, and they're going to abut right there. Now for the knee joint, I'm going to make this as tight as I possibly can. So I'm going to put that on one section. Put that on the other one. Now that should bend right there. The trouble with this is it can peel off. So I'm going to take some more tape. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to, I folded the knee back. I'm going to put some on the front of the joint here. Now where this tape is touching that tape, it's going to make an extremely strong bond and you can't peel it off. So I put like that. Now I've got a joint that can only move that far. It can't go beyond straight. It can't kick up that way. So that's a good knee joint.
That's awesome.
To further reinforce that, I usually go around the joint this way just to make sure nothing peels off. This might be overkill, but I think it's worthwhile doing if you want your puppet to last any length of time.
Yeah.
Can you show how an elbow is made differently?
And that would be a knee joint. To make an elbow joint, which you have a little more leeway with, it can be a little freer. You might want to separate those. It doesn't have to abut quite so closely. You can just leave maybe another 1/8 of an inch, and that will be plenty. So you get a little bit of movement through the joint this way, because you can move your forearm through here. So I usually have a little more play in the elbow joint than I do in the knee joint. But it also doesn't want to go too far beyond 180 degrees. I hope that.
And the
pretty
shoulder
clear.
looser still?
The shoulder is looser still. Yes, that's the loosest joint. I have probably 1/4 inch of material between the body and the upper shoulder joint there. So it has a lot more freedom. I like to be able, I think the puppet should be able to touch his opposite shoulder. At least the joint should be free enough to allow you to move that much movement. If you make it tighter than that, you're not going to have enough good movement in the puppet. So the joints have to be loose enough so that it moves very freely.
And then you just keep looking at yourself and testing out how
Right.
the body move, right?
Just look at your own wrist and try to figure out how do I make that so that it moves like that. You know, it'll determine how loose that joint should be.
Right. Amazing.
Okay.
So can I ask you to give us a tour of your workshop, all of the tools and stuff?
Sure. Well, there's some
Well,
behind here.
That's all right.
I mean, okay. We have this, these are a lot of the tools I use. These are the tools I use most often, so I put them right here. I have awls and small saws, all kinds of files, scissors, wire cutters of all kinds, different kinds of needle nose pliers. These come in very handy. These are more files. A lot of different kinds of wire. When I'm working on something very tight over at the, I put these on, this is a magnifier so I can see very small things. If I'm drilling something real small, very handy to have. What else do we have here? All kinds of clips, clamps for clamping things together. This is some of my collection of lead weights here. I have a number of fishing weights, which I use quite often. What I try to do is build the marionette as lightweight as I possibly can, and then judiciously add little pieces of lead in just the right place for movement. And I experiment with that. I tape the lead onto the puppet and I try to work it and see what would happen if I moved it down a little bit or up, and eventually you get at the right distribution of weight. I have several little pieces of lead here. This is solder, which is very heavy. Okay.
You said before that people could use coins as weights too.
Yes, if you're making one of those small puppets, coins work fine. You know, a penny, nickel, dime. I have all kinds of screws here. These are my staples. I have a few staple guns, which comes in very handy. Oh yeah, this is string. I have several different kinds here, but my go-to string is braided Dacron line. I like using it because it stays limp. It has no memory. Like monofilament line wants to coil itself. It has a lot of what they call memory, but this stays limp. It's easy to tie and untie. It's easy to handle, and it also stretches much less than nylon. So this is braided Dacron, and it's my favorite. There are several other kinds of string here, which I sometimes use. This is spider wire, which is much stronger than Dacron and doesn't stretch at all, but it's much more difficult to tie and untie. So I only use this for certain applications, and some of it's very heavy duty. Usually I will use this for the main weight bearing strings on the puppet so that it won't stretch at all. So this is 65-pound test, which is very, very, very strong. heavy duty line.
And can you show us how you would use the nylon and choose where you're going to put a string on?
Yeah, it's almost all nylon except maybe for the head strings and the shoulder strings. Shall I show you how I attach the string to the puppet?
Yeah, that was cool when you showed the other day.
Okay, come over here. This is a puppet that I've been working on and off for a long time. He's still not finished. But to attach the string to the puppet, I first do sort of a test patch. What I do is I take some string. Let me get a piece of string. I'll take a piece of string and I'll take a piece of tape. And I'll wrap the string around the tape 3 times. There's 1, 2, 3. Now I can attach this string anywhere I want on the puppet and see how that works. There's that point. That's what it will look like if he's holding it from there. If I want to try it somewhere else, I'll try it somewhere else. So I experiment with the placement of the strings on the puppet. And then once I've decided, okay, this is where I want it, you know what I mean? I might work with it for a week or so before I decide on the final placement of a string. And then
Depending on what he has to do with
depending on what he has to do, exactly.
Right.
When I'm sure of the placement, then I will drill a small hole. I have these little hand drills here, and I can drill a small hole exactly where I want that string to emanate from on his hand. And then I'll take a piece of wire, bend it in the shape of a U, and drive it into that hole. Here you can see this one. I like to have them very short so they don't catch any strings on the metal that's sticking up. Can you see that? There's a little metal thing there. I put it through the puppet.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. But anyway, that's the trick, is to drive it in there. And then on the far side, I bend it back and drive it back into with those needle nose pliers. I drive it back into the puppet's body. And then that's a permanent string.
And you use the pliers to tie the knot?
I don't use the pliers to tie the knot. I use the pliers to bend the wire
Got it.
that comes out the other side, and I bend it back on itself.
Can you point with
Oh.
yeah.
Oh, is that what you mean? Yeah. See, this is the wire that came out of that point, and I drove it right into the puppet, right into his hand. Doesn't take up any space. And now that's a permanent attachment there. Now, when all my strings are right and I know where they are, I'll take all the strings off and I'll paint this hand. But I don't want to paint it before I have made all the holes in it. So that's just my procedure.
That's awesome. Now, go ahead, Anna.
I'm sorry. Everybody's commenting on how expressive and beautiful the faces are. I'm wondering if you can maybe show us the mold process and how you
Sure.
create the heads.
Right here. These heads I'm making. There are several different ways to make the heads, but the heads I'm making right now, I'm making out of neoprene. So first I construct the head out of clay. This is a small rough. I just take some clay, press it together, and then after I press it together, it might look like this. Okay? And then I'll add some parts to it. I'll build it up and dig out the eye sockets, and it might look like this. And then I'll refine it a little further until it looks like this. And I'm using this tool here. This is a little sculpting tool to actually, move the clay. This is one of the most fun parts of building the puppet is modeling the heads. I enjoy it very much. this character is going to be a puppet who is worked by a puppet. And this is going to be the master puppet here. This is a clay head, which I've dug out, pulled it out. Now, let me just show you this, if I may. Is this all right? I'm going to take this piece and just show you a little bit about the modeling of the head. I'm being very aware of where the center line of the head wants to be. And then I'll dig out the eye sockets. Just with my modeling tool here. Shape that. The material I took out of there, I can add that on here for a nose. I can take a piece of clay and put it on here for the cylinder of the mouth. Now, I usually have some kind of idea of what the character is. Sometimes I make drawings of who I think the character is. And then, so this is the cylinder of the mouth.
And then will this dry by itself or you put it in a kiln?
No, this, I'm going to explain this. This is an oil-based clay. It will never dry. Let me just finish doing a little bit of this. So I'm going to make a cast. I'm going to make a mold of this head. I'll add a little bit on for the chin. I'll add some cheekbones here. I'm just trying to give you an idea of the modeling process here. So, and it's a lot of fun. You can change it any way you want. They do not have to be realistic looking. You can make cartoon character type puppets, you know, and that's fine. I've kind of settled on a type that I like to make, but you need not be limited by that. So anyway, that's the modeling process. And it goes from that sort of to this, and then just try to refine it a little more, and you'll get it like that.
Beautiful.
Now, in order to make a clay mold, in order to make the neoprene cast, I have to make a clay mold. This is a clay mold. Actually, this head I made about a week or two ago, and I pulled it out of this this plaster mold here. This head sat in there like that. I dug out the clay and I just pushed these back, and then you can pull the head out all in one piece. That leaves me with a negative. The negative shape is in there. I leave the model, the cast open at the bottom of the neck, and I will tape this together with rubber bands. I'll close this as tightly as I can, and I'll pour neoprene, which is, I'll show you some neoprene in a minute.
Just explain it.
Yeah, it's like, it looks like milk. You pour it into the dry plaster cast, and then the plaster is drawing moisture out of the neoprene and leaving a skin of neoprene on the inside of the plaster mold. Now you have to keep your eye on the level, because as the plaster draws the moisture, the level will drop inside the head here. So you keep topping it off while you're letting it sit there. And then if I let it go about a half an hour or 40 minutes, then I'll pour out the excess neoprene. I can pour right back into the container. It's still good. And then I'll wait for 24 hours. And in about 24 hours, that skin that's on the inside will have solidified enough that I can pry these apart and take out the neoprene head. Now, the beauty of casting it this way is that the neoprene comes out of the mold flexible. It's like leather. It's not rigid. So you can have deep undercuts, and you don't have to make a 5-part mold or anything. 2 parts will usually do it. And then I pull it out, and then over the next 24 hours, it dries and becomes rigid. Let me get a neoprene head here. I think I have one handy. There's one over here. I'll show you one here. This is a neoprene head, which I pulled out of a mold a long time ago, but it's very solid. It's very lightweight. It weighs nothing. I could throw this up against a brick wall and it wouldn't shatter or anything. It's very durable and it accepts adhesives and you can paint it. So I like working with it. The one drawback is it does shrink slightly, maybe up to 10%. So usually before I build any of the other body parts, I build the heads first and then take the actual finished head, and then I'll make my scale drawing of what the other parts are going to look like. I hope I'm being clear.
Amazing, amazing.
So
Then if you're building the other parts, how do you choose the fabric or you're painting the other parts that would go with it?
Well, for fabric, I like to use fabrics that sort of have a life of their own. I collect fabrics that I think might make good puppet, you know, things that have good movement. This is a piece of woman's scarf or something, but I'm thinking of using that. This is a piece of fabric I picked up. It has a life of its own. It's almost a puppet already. I could add a little hand here, but it just wants to move itself. You know what I mean? It looks like a living thing already. So that makes my job easier.
So people at home could walk around their house and just pick up fabric and see what comes to them.
Yeah, things that move. I like to use feather sometimes for hair because there's this little incidental movement. See that? It moves by itself kind of. And if you move the puppet, there's this little incidental movements in the fabric or in the hair. It makes it seem more alive. I try to give myself every advantage when I'm building the puppet to make it more successful. And this kind of sensitivity to what moves and what doesn't is really helpful. Building the costume on a marionette is very much a part of the movement. You know, the kind of sleeve you put around a joint really influences the way that it moves. So I try to be, when I'm building the puppet, I'm trying to think, what kind of fabric do I want to put around this? How's it going to move in the end? So I'm trying to be aware of all this while I'm building it.
It's awesome.
I did want to show a little bit, if you're interested, I would like to show you how I go from the clay head to the plaster mold. So if you don't mind, I'll take a second here. This is a piece of clay, which I rolled out with a rolling pin here. It's very easy to do. Clay is very malleable. And then I will slice off some pieces. I hope you're interested in this. This is part of the fun for me. Then I'll take the head, the clay head that I've made, and I'm going to decide where is that seam going to be between the front half of the mold and the back half of the mold. And where the front half of the mold is, I'm going to make a wall. It's called a clay dam. And I'll just go around this head. This head isn't really finished. It's not ready for this, but I'm going to just pretend it is. And I'll make this clay dam right around the head. And I'll do this all the way around. I hope I'm being clear. And once I have that clay all the way around there, I'll pour the plaster onto it and cover the head with plaster. And that will give me a clay head. I just pulled the dam off of this. This gives me a clay head that's immersed in plaster. So the shape of the face is inside this plaster. Now I can dig the plaster head out. I've started digging that one out.
Oh, wait, you have to make the back of the head first.
Well, right, I have to make the back of the head, which I've.
So how do you keep the two from sticking together?
Okay, yes. So I have the plaster mold here. I'll take liquid soap, like dishwashing soap, and I'll paint it on this surface of the plaster here. And then I will pour more plaster on top of that. That's what this is. I put soap here, the head was still in there, and I poured more plaster on there. It dried, and now I pried it apart, and I dug the clay out. Am I being clear? Is this?
Yeah.
This is the head
That one.
that I pried out. This one, I've just started removing the clay. This is the back of this head. Came out of this mold. This is the mold, and I can dig this clay out. And once I get enough of it out, I can roll the sides of the head back from the mold and withdraw it. And then I'll have a negative space just like this.
Hey, can
And then
you
you're gonna pour the neoprene into that to make the
Yes.
actual
back a
puppet.
little bit? Like that right there, you can actually see like a 3D.
Can you get a sense of what that's odd, because here in person, I can't really see that three-dimensional illusion.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But anyway, that's the making of the head process. I'll just go over it one more time. I put that in there. I put the neoprene in. I let it dry. I pour the neoprene out. I wait 24 hours. I pry these apart, and I will have a neoprene head, which will dry over the next 24 hours.
Amazing.
And then it's ready to paint or put glue onto and put the hair, whatever you do.
That's awesome. Can we see, there was a girl puppet in a pink dress.
Oh, yeah,
And then I want to
This-
see the elephant.
sure.
I'm getting
This
ahead.
is a puppet I'm working on. It's not really ready to show, but I'll show you. I haven't really attached this hair yet. I'm thinking of using this hair.
Don't take it off yet.
Don't take it off?
No.
Okay. I'll show you the feet of this puppet. I've decided to make, I think I'm going to have her kneel down at least on one knee at some point. So I made the feet flexible here. I just made a joint out of, you can't really see it in there, but it's just made out of a tire inner tube, which is very durable rubber material. And her own body weight will be enough to let her move the front of her foot like that. So this is the puppet.
It's awesome.
Could
And
you
she
also
has Go ahead.
I'm sorry. At some point, would you also show us the armature of the hand that you showed us when you were
Oh,
showing
yeah.
us this girl?
Joe?
Yeah,
Can you move her, please?
yeah, I'll move her.
Sorry.
And then this is,
Use that as a background.
yeah,
There you go.
this is just a piece of wire that I bent. Usually when I'm making, sometimes I make the hands out of paper mache, and whenever I do, it's a paper mache mash. Actually, it's a material called celluclay, which is a commercially available paper mache mash. And you mix it with water, and it makes like a clay-like substance, but it's very lightweight. And so I will make the hand like this in whatever position I think it should be. You know, you can bend the fingers any way you want. And then I'll just start to attach the paper mache, and I'll build it onto this wire framework so that it doesn't sag. The paper mache itself, if you tried to model a hand, would sag, the fingers would move. But if you build it onto a wire armature, it stays where you want it. So I make these sometimes. Sometimes I make the hands out of other materials. This one is cast polyurethane plastic. I modeled the head in a polymer clay for that, and I'll make a silicone mold and cast them in this polyurethane plastic. This is a head made out of the paper mache material. This is a celluclay. It's a little harder to model than regular clay, so I don't usually use it as much as I used to. I like to model the heads in regular clay. This is a little like modeling with tuna fish. It's much more difficult to get subtleties. This is another material. This is paper clay, which is also commercially available in art stores. It's very lightweight. It's a little harder to use than the neoprene heads, so I like to use the neoprene.
So we have a question in the chat for where do you get your inspirations for the figures and the puppets? Is it literature or plays or?
Usually not. Usually it's based on observation. I keep a little notebook, and if I see something that I think would make a good marionette piece. I will start to make little drawings of who I think the character is, but it's almost always based on something I've seen or something you're familiar with. I try to make all the themes in the show universal. They're things that everybody's familiar with, but it's mostly based on observation, and then I make a lot of drawings.
Yeah.
And once I have a pretty clear idea in my mind of who the character is and what he might be doing, I'll start to make the parts. And once in a while I'm making the puppet, the whole idea changes based on what's happening with what I'm making. You know what I mean? Sometimes you get an inspiration in the middle of building a puppet that turns out to be something you hadn't started with.
And is there any position or something or way of the body that's like just really challenging to make and you've had to do a workaround or something?
Yeah, I years ago started making a ballerina, and I didn't want it to be the standard ballerina marionette. I don't know if you even know it, but there are a number of ballerina marionettes out there, but they all kind of do the same thing. And I was trying to have her do something completely different, and I had her hitting a lot of interesting poses, but I had trouble with the transition movement. So I may get back to that, but I never completely solved that. It's an interesting problem.
Awesome.
Hope that answers the question.
Yes. So I got ahead of myself before, but can you show us the elephant?
Oh, sure.
Joe, can you put her back?
What's that? I'll put her back there. Let me put this over on this hook. So the elephant is in this box. A lot of people ask me about how do you transport the marionette. So I thought I'd show you this, how I open the box.
Now, do you learn how to make a box like this in puppetry school?
No, I just, it's all problem solving. I used to carry the marionettes around in separate boxes, but I decided it would be easier to make custom boxes for the marionettes, and the box can turn into the stand. So this is how I transport most of the marionettes. I've made these boxes that turn into a stand. I don't know if you can see it, but this is a stand. This is a stand that's really a box. This is a box. All the marionettes are hanging from these puppet stands, which really are boxes. They all go in the box. So
I love this. This whole contraption is really fascinating.
So yeah, I've tried to pack the marionettes so that they're safe in there. This is just foam I'm taking off, which protects the body of the marionette.
Oh, wow.
So this is ear protection on the marionette, which is just paper mache back with a little foam and a clip. When I originally made this box, I didn't have these ear protectors on. I pulled him out one time and his ear was folded and kinked, and so I had to replace the ear. So I made these ear protection things so I don't have to do that now. So this is the tricky part, taking out the main control of the elephant. Second.
Oh, sorry.
Hold on a second. So this is the elephant. I have, let me, this is the elephant, and this is the elephant control I'm holding in my hand here. There are several parts to it. What I'm holding in my left hand is the head and trunk control. I have it, you might notice that I'm not using any fingers to hold this up. I have a strap that goes around the back of my hand on my left hand, and that bears the weight of the puppet's head and trunk, and that leaves all of my fingers free to press these various levers. So this one I'm pressing with my ring finger of my left hand raises the end of his trunk. I don't know if you can see it, but that pulls a string that pulls that lever out there that raises the trunk. Is that clear? Okay, now I have with my middle finger of my left hand, I can raise this next lever, and that raises it further down on this trunk. And I have another lever here for further down still, so that, can you see the puppet? Okay, now with my index finger, I can raise this rod, and that turns his trunk in that direction, or with my little finger, I can turn it in that direction. Also on the head control, I have access to his ears. I can move one ear or the other ear, or grab both of those strings for both ears. And also on the end of his trunk, you can see I can close those two little protrusions for picking up small objects. Can you see that?
Yeah.
I'm doing that with my thumb here. Okay. Now, right about now, I'm really feeling this in my shoulder. This became a big problem because I had the puppet's piece is about 7 minutes long, and I have to be able to hold it here. So what I did, because I could feel it in my shoulder, I made myself this little strap here. Now this is a jointed piece that I can rest my forearm in. I strap this onto my body, and this is set at just the right height that I can take this control. It takes the weight of the puppet off my shoulder and puts it on my hip here. See that, how that works?
Yeah.
So yeah, it allows enough free movement in my forearm that I can now move this puppet, and I'm not struggling with the weight. Hold on, I'll show you something else.
You're talking about the weight of the elephant. About how much does he weigh, do you think?
You know, I haven't weighed him, but he's at least 8 pounds, probably more than that, which doesn't sound like much until you start holding your arm out like that for a while.
Absolutely.
Does anybody have any questions about any of
Yeah,
this?
what is all that made out of? What are the materials?
Yeah,
Oh,
tell
let
us
me
how
do
you
it.
did that.
Yeah, okay. Most of this control is made out of bent wire. The armature, the basic part I made is bent wire, but all of these straight pieces here are made out of tubing. It's carbon tubing. It's actually, I got this material from a sporting goods store. It's arrows. Arrow shafts are made out of this. It's much lighter weight than any kind of dowel, and much more rigid than any kind of dowel. I could show you some of that in the raw material over there. But So a big part of building the controls is to try to arrange it so that you can reach the strings you need to. So everything is right here where my fingers can reach them. I can raise that lever or press it down. When I press it down, that draws his trunk in towards his head, the middle part of his trunk.
How did you get the elephant to eat the apple?
Yeah, there's a very strong magnet on the roof of his mouth, and there's a small magnet inside the piece of fruit there. And if I get it within like an inch or two of the magnet on the roof of his mouth and release it, it'll go right in. So there's a little timing maneuver that I have to do.
Wilma, would you do a close-up of the end of his trunk so we could see him grabbing it?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Now that's just mechanical. He's holding that with the end of his trunk, and if I do this right, I don't think I did it. It didn't go in, did it?
It stuck, but it didn't go in.
Okay. Anyway, that's the general idea.
Amazing.
Nope.
Nope.
Well, you have to trust me.
That's awesome. So how did you get, I mean, did you go to the zoo? Did you watch films? How did you get
I did.
that?
I went to a nature park and they had 13 elephants, and I spent a day. I made a lot of drawings of elephants, and I really like elephant. I think they're a magnificent animal, and I think the trunk is amazing. So I did a lot of observation of elephants. I made a lot of drawings, and then when I had a clear idea, I made my scale drawing, and I'd like to show you that. Get in there too. The upper one is the scale drawing. Okay. This is the drawing that I mostly worked from to build the parts of the marionette. So what I do is I get the scale drawing and I trace out where I think the parts are, where I think the joint should be. I make a tracing. And then I'll take this piece and I'll trace it onto these just pieces of cardboard, and I'll decide, is this the right place for the joint? And I can experiment with that by putting holes in different spots, and until I get it moving in what I think is a normal looking way, you know, a natural looking way, so it seems like it has good movement. So I solve some of this movement problem in 2 dimensions, and then I'll take these cardboard pieces, these card pieces, I'll take them off and I'll trace them onto, this is just styrofoam, like you use for home insulation styrofoam here. And I cut it out in 2 dimensions and I stack them together. This is just toothpicks holding this together. And then I'll carve it down with a knife and then sandpaper until I get the actual 3-dimensional form. I do want to point out that styrofoam is not a strong enough material. So what I do is I take some epoxy and I glue in this material, which is micro plywood, which has incredible strength for very little material there. And I glue the micro plywood to it so that what's holding the weight of this really is the micro plywood with an epoxy resin glue. Then I put it all together. And this also has the micro plywood. And I'll show you a piece of that micro plywood if you're not familiar with it. And then this is another piece of carbon. It's a piece of arrow shaft. And I'll put that in there. And that will be the joint. And I'll cut the joint right to that side. Now, when this is done, what I do is I paint about 6 coats of neoprene onto this. And neoprene is the same material I use for casting the heads. And that will tighten up around this styrofoam and make a shell. It's a much more sturdy material because this could be dented very easily, the styrofoam, but the neoprene shell is a good material for covering that. So that's how the elephant was made. This is a prototype of the tail of the elephant, which is also, this is just styrofoam carved and then glued onto a piece of Dacron string. This is how both the tail and the trunk were made in this kind of construction. The trunk of the elephant, however, does have a tube that runs through it. There is a point in the show. I don't want to give too much away here. But he blows air out through the end of the show.
Because people are asking how they can see the full show. So I have two questions. So one is the full production of Simple Gifts is going to be on October 10th. So
Yes.
have everyone come back and see that.
Oh, I hope you come.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's
at NJCU at the Margaret Williams Theater. And my other question is how many, so in the full production, is it one puppeteer for each marionette, or can you do multiple at once?
well, the only ones I use more than one at once is the mother and the baby. I could show you that
Yeah.
if you want to see.
And the elephant will be in that show.
Yes, the elephant will be in that show.
While you're pulling that out, we have a question from one of our young viewers. Orion would like to know if there is a time that you ran out of supplies and you had to use something else.
Ran out of supplies. That's a good question.
Does it look like he's gonna run out of supplies?
I try not to run out. Here, I'll get the mother. So this is the mother and the baby marionette.
Oh my gosh.
The baby's control I'm holding in my left hand, and I have a little, with my little finger, I have a little rocker bar that kicks his feet, and I can move his arms with my index finger and my thumb, and I can get the front of his head, his nose string, with my middle finger there. Now I can draw the baby to the mother with my thumb here. There's a string that draws her in there. And also, I can have her sit down in the trunk with me.
Amazing.
I think I did that right. But I have oh, I don't have the control here. I can't let that go. Anyway, she lays the baby in the cradle, but right now I don't have that together. Excuse me. Oh, there it is. I don't have my bar up here to hold the baby's control. I shouldn't have shown you that. I wasn't prepared. But the baby does detach from the mother's hand when she lays her in the cradle. If you really want to see it, you'll have to come see the show.
There you go. So in the video that we saw at the beginning, there was a climbing guy.
Yes,
Oh, yeah.
this guy.
Do you have a marionette of yours that's a personal favorite?
Do you have any children of your own that are personal favorites? It's like the
Yes.
same kind of question. Whichever one I'm working with at that moment, that's my personal favorite. No, I haven't picked a personal favorite. I've probably made over 150 marionettes in my life, and the ones that I'm working with are what I think is my best work, and those are my favorites. So this puppet here is strung in a certain way so that he can climb up my body here. First I have him look up, and then now the problem is I can't make my arm any longer than it is. And I wanted him to get all the way up. So what I had to do is find a way to make the strings shorter. So I'll show you how that is. What I did with this puppet was instead, hold on a second. Instead of tying the strings off as I normally would, I tied them in the normal way to the puppet's body. So the string is attached on his hand there. It comes up here. Instead of tying it here on the control where I normally would, I made a little loop at that point, and I threaded the string through the control. All the strings go to this central loop. The strings come up from the puppet, they meet this loop, they come in, and they're all attached to this ring. So when I pull this ring away from the control, the distance from the puppet to the control gets shorter. You see that? Yet I still have control of his arms and his turning of his head and everything like that. But the problem with this is I didn't have control of his legs with that. So what I did with this hook, I take this ring which is attached to his leg strings, which undergo the same thing. There, all the leg strings go through to that hook there. And with this bottom hook, I take that ring. Now, when I separate these, both the distance, both the leg strings and all the body strings are getting shorter at the same time, allowing him to come all the way up. That's how that was done.
That's amazing.
I hope it's clear.
Amazing. So we have some more questions from the chat.
Sure.
One is, how did you, so you were 11 and you built this puppet, but then how did that follow, getting interested in puppetry, and then where did you train and where, and?
Yeah, I'm self-taught at the puppets. I read every book I could find about marionettes, and I went to any puppet show I could to see about puppets, but I actually never trained with anybody. I did study fine arts in school. I thought I was going to be a painter, and I still do some painting and drawing. But the construction of the marionettes is really, I really just kind of did a lot of experimenting on my own, and came up with my own designs for controls just out of necessity. I didn't, there are a few good puppet books out there. Two I can think of is there's a puppet called, there's a puppet book called Marionette in Motion by a man named Dwiggins. It's just a little pamphlet, but that had some good ideas in it. And there was another one called the Marionette Source Book by a man named Lumen Code. He's a Canadian. But both of those books had a few good ideas in them. Other than that, it's just been experimenting with it on my own. I did want to show you something else about this puppet. If I could just hang in here for a second.
And then the guitar guy too, I want to see.
Oh,
And then like looking in and seeing you.
The audience is suggesting you should write a book.
Maybe so. These days, maybe it would be a video.
Oh, that'd be good.
Sure.
So there was something else this puppet had to do. At one point, he has to stack these blocks.
Wow.
So it's very difficult for marionettes to handle props, but it can be done. He has a string here that pulls his hands together, and right where his hands meet the block, I put a little pin. I'll show you that close up.
A pin on his hand or on the block?
Yeah, no, on his hand.
Hold on.
Ah.
There are actually two little pins
Hold it
here.
from the bottom because it's not focusing.
It's not focusing?
No, once it's focusing, if you hold it still.
Okay. I'm going to point to them. These little pins here engage that block, which is made out of foam.
Oh, I see him.
You see them?
Uh-huh.
Those two little pins there. And he has two on the other hand as well. Right there.
Yeah, I see.
And that's how he's able to pick up the blocks. What else can I show you?
We had another interesting question from the audience.
Sure.
Do you ever perform with other puppetry artists who use other kinds of puppets, cross medium?
I haven't. I'm nothing against that, but it's not something I've done. My first puppet shows we ever did when we were children were hand puppet shows. That's the last time I actually did some hand puppet things. That's not entirely true. I had another hand puppet I used when I was in college, but generally, no. I've pretty much settled on the marionettes. Let me hang this up.
Now, when you are traveling, and then you start unpacking stuff, do the lines get tangled?
Not if I'm careful putting them in and taking them out. I've built all these boxes for the marionettes, and if I'm careful putting them in and taking them out, they don't get tangled. I don't know if it's clear, but these boxes, I have little hooks in here, which I hang. All the controls have a hook on the top. I hang the puppet from a hook, and then I gather all the strings together and pass them through another hook at the bottom of the box, and then up over another hook, and then the body of the marionette hangs in there. So they're kind of folded in the box. The boxes are all foam lined. This is foam. So once it's in there and closed, nothing can move. So I hope that's
Yeah.
relatively clear. Maybe I'll show this guy.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Running into things.
You all right there?
Yeah.
You were talking about the clothing earlier. Do you make all the clothing, or do you ever
I do.
buy?
No, I do make all the clothing. I think the clothing is very much a part of the movement of the marionette. So I don't want to leave that to anyone else. I make that myself. Let me move this over here.
What do you make your stages out of? That's an interesting question. Do you have, from the video, it looks like you perform on the floor and not behind a stage.
Yeah, we bring a platform with us and a backdrop. I work against a black backdrop. I wear black clothes, and we create a pool of spotlight in which the puppet works. When I first started performing, I did have a traditional marionette stage in which I was up on a bridge, what's called a bridge, and leaning against a railing with a backdrop on it and hidden by curtains so people could see the puppet but not me. But the way it works now is I work in the open, I wear black, as I said, and we have the puppet in the spotlight. So I'm not really well lit, but I'm not invisible either. But if the movement is good, people will tend to watch the puppet and not me. But
Do you want to talk about the faces being asymmetrical?
oh yeah. So I often try to build the puppet in such a way that the face is not perfectly symmetrical. So as the puppet turns and sees different from different angles, it can appear to change his expression, especially with body language. This puppet at one point has to look inside this bag, which is a pretty good trick for a marionette. Put that down. And he also has to pull a handkerchief out of his pocket.
Oh my God.
That's great. About the staging, why did you, a question from the audience, why did you change from being on the bridge to being in front and visible?
Yeah, well, I noticed that, I'd get invited to a party or something and somebody would say, can you bring one of those marionettes in? Or I had some friends who were school teachers and they asked me to bring a marionette in to show their class. And I would just be me with a marionette there. And it was so much easier than bringing the whole stage. And also, some people told me it was real interesting to see what I was doing, you know what I mean? So I started to develop a show where I was just working in the open. It just kind of happened because people found it interesting. So I decided to make a whole show of just me in the open with the marionettes. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
That's awesome.
In the early 70s, I was doing a stage, marionettes with a bridge, a traditional marionette stage. Actually, at those times is how I met my wife, Wilma, here. I was working with her brother. I got him to get in on this with me. We did some marionette shows together in that traditional style, we were doing fairy tale type marionette plays at the time on a traditional stage.
Let's take a couple more questions and wrap it up because of time. Who writes the stories? Do the stories come first, or the character guide, or do the characters guide the stories?
Sometimes it's the character first, but more often I have an idea of what I think the theme is, what it is I want to try to communicate, and out of that comes the character. I make a lot of drawings, as I said, and I'm trying to think who I think the character is. And I want to know, I'm thinking about what kinds of positions do I have to get the body into in order to communicate the main theme of the piece. Once that's all pretty clear in my head, I'll start to make the parts.
Sometimes the music comes first.
Sometimes the music, sometimes I'll hear a piece of music and just get a visual image in my mind. The violinist, I heard this piece of music and I just had an image of a guy playing this violin, an older man. So I made this. There were a few of the pieces where the music inspired the piece, but it can happen anyway. It could be the music first, it could be the idea of the puppet first. I just want to explain what's happening here. I wanted him to raise this violin up to his chin. So what I did was, the string is connected right to where I want the violin to end up. It's right on his neck. The string is connected there. It goes through a loop on the end of the violin. Can you show that, Will? The loop on the end of the violin. And as I pull that up, that draws the violin right to that spot on his neck. Now, up here, if you can look, I have a perch here that I have control of with the index finger of my right hand. And I'm going to put that string, that's the violin string that holds the violin in place. Now that leaves my left hand free to take these bowing strings, and I put the bow onto the bridge of the violin, and I have this strung so that I have 3 strings that go to his right hand, and I can change the angle of his hand so it looks like he's playing the notes you're hearing. Also, for the longer notes, I have a little vibrato string here so he can vibrate his left hand. There's a very strong illusion that he's playing the notes you hear during the piece.
It's beautiful.
So this piece was inspired by the music.
Amazing.
Do most of the puppets work on the same mechanics is the question.
Well, the head and the shoulder relationship is almost always the same. So I always start with that, but from there, it can change. Depending on what the puppet has to do, I might design the control a little differently. I did want to show one other thing. I don't know if people are interested, but when I was showing Ramul, he turned his head either way. Now, with the traditional marionette control, with the traditional way the marionette turns his head, they always drop their head a little when they turn it, just because of the nature of what I showed you there. But there is another, I'm not going to do this puppet, but I just wanted to show that there is another way to turn the head, and that is
Top or bottom?
just show it on the puppet here. Now this puppet can turn his head without dropping his head. I wanted him to be able to turn his head like that, and he can do that because the string that turns his head is attached under his chin, goes through a loop on his shoulder up to the control, and when I pull that string, that pulls his head to the side. Can you see that? I'm doing that with my thumb up here. I don't know if you're interested in seeing that. Okay. Also, I wanted to point out there are several, because these controls are original designs, sometimes I find out that I have to make a string of a certain length, and if it's too long, it will get tangled in the puppet's body. So I have these a solution to that problem, which is these little floating weights which ride on the string. The string has to be this length for it to function. If this is strings for him stepping back. But I didn't want those strings to get tangled in his own feet. So this, can you see what's happening there? That ball is, that weight is riding up and down on that string. So the slack is not down at the puppet, it's up here. It's up here where it won't get tangled. Is that clear?
Yes, amazing.
Well, thank you for saying yes.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he has several. He has 7 of these floating weights that keep the tangles from happening down there.
So can you just show us one more? Is the guitar player?
Oh yeah. So this is kind of a comedy piece. He's a heavy metal guitar player, and during his piece, he has a little trouble with his amp. I have several things happening here. I don't know if you can see it, but he has some moving fingers there with this. And on his left hand, I have a finger that moves. He also is equipped with a, there's one point when he drops down to his knees and I release this head string here and he has I have a string that releases a joint in his neck for doing that. Then I can pull it right back in. Does anybody have any questions about any of this?
I have one question. There's been so many questions we've gone over, and it's amazing. And I have one question philosophically.
Yeah.
If you were to travel back in time from when you started as a kid,
Yes.
what advice would you give your little kid self
Ooh,
from where you are today?
yes. Be an accountant. No, I'm just kidding. That was supposed to be a joke. Yeah. I'm not sure. I wish I had gotten serious about doing the marionettes a little earlier in life. I would have told myself, yeah, get into those puppets. That was a good thing. It's fun, and I've managed to make a living doing it, and it's been great. Yeah, I just wish I had started getting serious about it in my teenage years instead of waiting till I was, I didn't really get serious about it until I was in my 20s, I'd say. That's when I started thinking, yeah, I'm going to try to really make a marionette look like it's alive and do unusual things.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. So again, in the chat is the instructions for making the marionette that Joseph said. Try it. It's amazing. And please join us on October 10th for.
Oh, please do. It's going to be way better than this was.
It's awesome.
So
It's
thanks
awesome.
for coming.
And please stay tuned. Visit njcu.edu/arts. We're going to have a whole continued series of behind the scenes with artists and their process. Anna, anything to add?
No, just stay tuned. We've got a lot of interesting things coming up with a lot of different artists.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your lovely comments.
Yes, thank you.
Have a great afternoon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.